In spite of it.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing? All right, everybody. Welcome. Parshat Tazria. This is a very fascinating Torah portion in the fact that this is a very in-depth discussion about a malady, about an illness that is not natural in any way, shape, or form. It is a skin malady, a skin illness. But if you have a Chumash, Bible, or whatever it is that translates this as leprosy, that is an incorrect translation. Leprosy is a physical ailment, one that, thank God, is not really prevalent anymore, if at all. But once upon a time existed, and it had natural reasons and natural causes, and natural ointments and natural treatments. And this is not leprosy. Sara'at is not leprosy. Sara'at is sara'at. That's all it is. It is not, and this is an important point to understand. It is not something that comes about because of some anatomical aberration or infection or what have you. It comes about because of a spiritual issue, a spiritual malady that is being manifest in a physical and material way, which is a very interesting paradigm. Because for the most part, even though we Jews understand and believe strongly that the spiritual and the physical are linked, the spiritual, especially if you finish the JLI course we just had, the spiritual realm is just as real. In fact, it is even more real than the physical because it is what underpins the physical world. And we know this to be true intuitively because when we measure certain things in the physical world, we don't measure it purely by its physical measurements and its physical details, but more by its spiritual. We do this in law, right? If somebody commits a crime, we don't necessarily focus completely on the act, but the intent that underpins it, right? Two people can cut somebody open with a knife, and one of them could be a doctor, and he gets lauded and is considered a hero for it, and somebody, God forbid, is the opposite. And it's not just necessarily about the damage, because what happens, God forbid, if the doctor, by cutting open this person, ends up killing them? But we still consider we still give the doctor credit for his heroic effort because the intent was to save this person, and the doctor was doing their utmost best and was weighing the risks and deemed that cutting this person open had a chance of perhaps saving them, and it didn't work out, but we don't hold the doctor responsible in that regard.
As a former medical malpractice lawyer, I could discuss these things with you, but never mind.
Right. But the point is, what is the entire, your field, the discussion and debate is about the intent, right? The intent of it more than perhaps the actual act. And the same is true about a painting, right? Certain paintings look like they shouldn't be worth anything. It's a scribble scrabble. But the way you gauge the value of it is not by necessarily the actual parameters and details of the physical painting, but the intent that underpins it. Modern art, or even certain, like Picasso. If you didn't have a sense of the underpinning of what Picasso was trying to perhaps portray, you would look at a Picasso and say, this person is a terrible artist. The proportions are all wrong. There's 4 eyes instead of 2 eyes, or there's only 1 eye with the nose going that way. This person, we understand that that there is a spiritual layer that underpins. Same thing with music. Same thing with pretty much everything. And same thing again in relationships. In any relationship we are in, we don't want our significant other focusing completely on the physical layer of who we are, right? That they're in our relationship with us simply because we are beautiful physically, but rather we hope for them that they see deeper, they see our true self, that spiritual layer that underpins and exists beneath the physical layer. So we believe very strongly that a spiritual layer exists, that in a very real way, it's more real than the physical layer. It's the foundation of the physical layer. But for the most part, the two layers don't really, there isn't a direct seamless transition, as it were, between one to the other. What I mean by this is that a spiritual issue does not necessarily manifest itself in the physical. Certain people look like they're great human beings and they have a very dark soul, right? We'd like to all pretend that just looking at the face of Hitler, right? But that really is more of a kind of a chicken or an egg thing. Now that we know that this is the face of evil, so then to us it looks like the face of evil. If you asked a 3-year-old to look at this and to determine what kind of person this is, they wouldn't automatically say, ooh, this is a horrible, terrible person. It could be if they would look at his face and life and dead eyes and all that kind of thing, maybe. But you see, that's not the thing. Osama bin Laden looked like, oftentimes, like a benevolent grandfatherly figure. The point being that the physical,
Machshmo.
right, but that drives home the point that the physical layer and the spiritual layer are not automatically and seamlessly integrated to the point where something that is existing in the spiritual layer, and an advantage or a deficit, is automatically visible on the spiritual. This is why, to a certain degree, the one part of the body that is very much a window to the spiritual layer is what draws all our attention. When you're looking at somebody, the Talmud tells us that one part of that person is a window into their spiritual layer. Anybody know what that is?
The eyes, I assume.
The eyes. The eyes are the windows to the soul, says the Talmud. And that it's not an accident that when somebody looks, when you look at an object, when you're looking at any given object, generally you look towards the very center of the object, right? And yet nobody, even as a baby, when they look at a person, look at their belly button. Why not? That's kind of their center of this object. But we understand that really I'm not trying to look at their physical layer. I'm trying to look deeper. I'm trying to look at who they really are. And what gives me that sense is not their mouth, not their nose, not their belly button, but specifically their eyes. If I really want to kind of try and gauge what is going on in this all-important layer beneath the surface, what is going on with their spirit, with their soul, I look at the eyes. So that is what makes the discussion in this Torah portion fascinating, because we are talking about a physical illness, a skin disease that has nothing to do with the physical taxonomy of an individual. Nothing to do with the physiology, nothing to do with their genetic makeup. It has nothing to do with any of that. And it is entirely about what's going on inside of them spiritually. A spiritual malady is manifest in this skin malady known as tzaraat. Anybody knows what brings on tzaraat?
Oh, I used to know.
לשון הרע.
Very good.
להוציא שם רע.
Right. Speaking
Good.
bad about somebody behind their bottom. Lashon hara. Lashon hara, a version of it is as Paula mentioned, motzi shem ra. The difference between lashon hara and motzi shem ra is lashon hara is where you're saying something truthful, negative, and behind their back, but truthful. And motzi shem ra is to say something untruthful behind somebody's back. And then there's something called rechilus, which is gossip. And gossip is not necessarily evil or negative. I'm enjoying talking about something that happened to somebody else, which is not a very good thing. In fact, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said that great people talk about ideas. Average people talk about events. Mediocre people talk about people, right? I think I heard this first from Sudi. right? I think Sudi, you were the first one I heard this line from, and then I saw it.
I think it's small people talk about people.
Okay,
Hey, she
good.
knows it better.
There you go.
Other than
Why
that,
does Sudi get credit for quotes? I have given you so many
Because she's
jokes.
perfect.
oh,
He knows you know too much, you know. He has to give
Jerry,
credit.
if I would
If
have
only
to
I
give you
practiced
accreditation
it.
to everything I learned from you, I wouldn't be able to get another word in edgewise.
Ah,
But either way, the point being that tzara'at is for this specific sin. Very fascinating. We don't find that any other sin has this type of manifestation, this type of consequence. Not one has this type of consequence. Uh, uh, Theft, murder, right? We would think murder, makes you, makes you a shade darker or something. You carry around this darkened pall, No, sin is a stain on your soul, and it's not necessarily manifest on the body. But this one sin, the sin of lashon hara, is manifest on the body. And there is a very unique procedure. Here we have an entire Torah portion devoted to discussing, diagnosing tzara'at, or understanding that what you're seeing is not tzara'at. And it gets into incredibly, dare I say, excruciating detail about what renders tzara'at. If it seems like the whiteness of this malady, the skin disease, is on the surface of the skin, or it's one layer deeper, if it has changed the colors of the hairs in that patch of blemish, if it is a red hue, adam damet, or it's a greenish hue, yirakot, it goes into such incredible detail.
But Rabbi, it also appears on edifices.
No,
bingo, bingo.
Yes, hold on. We're not there yet. We're going to talk about that also. But basically, so much detail about diagnosing this. And the Talmud says the Torah says, when you've discovered upon yourself this blemish, first of all, the Torah cautions against trying to hide it, right? Because what would be somebody's first impulse if they discovered this on them, and the potential consequences that come if it in fact is what it is that
Put on a coat.
wearing long sleeve shirts, right? And they're going to try to pretend it's not there, ignore it, and hide it. The Torah warns that if you do that, it will begin to spread. God says, I put it on you for a reason, and don't think that I can't make it visible against your best efforts. You're going to address it. You're going to address it whether you like it or not. And it says, so when this tzara'at is found upon your person, and as Jerry mentioned, not only on your person, the parsha then goes on to say, also on your clothing, and then gets into a whole discussion about what would render it considered, what would make it considered tzara'at on the clothing. If it's woven clothing, textiles, then it would have to have a certain amount on the weave and the counter weave, right? And if it's on leather or something that is not a textile, is not a woven garment, it would have to show up in this fashion. The Torah goes into such incredible detail about the proper diagnosing of tzara'at. And then the other place that it can be discovered on is, as Jerry said, on edifices, on your house, on the walls of your house. And what happens, let's start with the most common and the one that generates the most conversation here. If it's found on your body, on your arm, on your shoulder, on your chest, on your legs, whatever, found some, then what you need to do is immediately bring it to the Kohen. The Kohen will take a look. Uva ela kohanim, and you'll bring it to the kohanim asher bayamim hain, that will be there at that time, and they will take a look, and they will gauge, and they will analyze. And the Kohen will look at it and make one of two determinations. Either tahor, you're pure, you're fine, you're good. Sorry, one of three determinations. Yeah, one of three determinations. Well, let me clarify this. Yeah, one of three determinations. One is he will look at it and he will see the symptoms of a regular skin disease or perhaps a burn, right? And any other type of wound or disease. Determine that it's not tzaraat because it does not fulfill the particulars of tzaraat. Either the colors of the hair haven't changed, so you have the skin disease, but it hasn't changed the colors of the hairs in that blemish to white, or it doesn't go deep enough, or it has a more of a yellowish hue instead of a pure white hue, all these various things. So one determination is tahor, you're free to go. The other determination is, it is definitively tzaraat. It's definitively this particular spiritual malady being manifest on the skin, and tamei, and you are impure. Now, why that's the terminology for the declaration, we're going to hear about in a moment. Or the Kohen could say inconclusive and come back in another 7 days. And we'll see. Has it spread? Has it receded? Has it changed colors? Etc., etc. In that second 7 days, he will make a declaration only of one of two declarations, either tahor, because it's receded, or it hasn't changed at all, at which point that would be an indication that it's not tzaraat. But if it has changed and gotten worse in any way, either spread or become whiter or gone deeper or whatever it is, or the hairs have started to change color, in that case, the Kohen will declare tamei. So either at the very beginning of the 7 days or at the end of the 7 days, if the determination is that the symptoms indicate tzaraat, at that point, it is a very bad time for this fellow, for the mitzora. For the mitzora, which is erroneously translated as the leper, as the one who has the tzaraat. But the mitzora then immediately has to go into exile, and a very unpleasant exile. They have to not only leave their home, they have to leave the community, not only leave the community, but go completely out of society. They're not allowed to be around any other human beings. In fact, even on the way out, if anybody would come over to engage them, to talk to them, they would have to turn to that person and declare, mitzora, mitzora. I am a mitzora, I am a mitzora. And that person would immediately back away. And they would have to stay there as long as it would take for the tzaraat to begin to recede. However long that is. At which point they can send for the Kohen would see it, and the Kohen would declare, yes, this is on the mend, the spiritual malady is on the mend, and 7 days later the Kohen would come back, and if the Kohen would see what he would need to see, he could then declare the person ready to return to the camp of the Jewish people, and then they go through a process of bringing a purification process, mikvah, and various offerings and atonements, and finally the person is able to rejoin society. So this is an incredibly serious consequence, especially, you can imagine, in the time when they were in the desert. When the Jewish people were in the desert, then safety, security, a sense of peace, serenity was the fact that you were among people. Can you imagine having to spend an indeterminate amount of time alone in a desert? Alone, utterly alone. So it is a very significant consequence. And the Rebbe says a beautiful thought here, a beautiful thought. Because here's an interesting discussion in the Talmud. You have this particular concern, this blemish on your skin. And you're concerned, right? God forbid this should be tzarat, but you have to go get it looked at. So who do you go to? It says, and you will go to the Kohen. And the Kohen is the expert, right? This is one of the jobs of the Kohen. Kohen is an expert at knowing all the laws, all the details. The Kohen is the diagnostician, right, of this particular malady. But the Talmud asks a question. It could be just for argument's sake, to debate this, and it may not have ever been an actual issue. But what would happen if the Kohen was not an expert? If for whatever reason, the Kohanim of the time, no Kohen there on call or whatever it was, knew enough about this illness, knew enough about Tzaraat to determine if this particular manifestation covers the bases to either be Tzaraat or not. Just that Kohen is not fluent in his Tzaratology, right? Young guy, young group, whatever it is, or unfortunately, what was not uncommon towards the end of the first and then the second temple era was that the Jewish infrastructure was not at its best. And I don't mean just at its best, kind of logistically. I mean at its best spiritually. Which means that the Kohen Gadol is not necessarily as righteous as he should be. Oftentimes, especially in the era of the Romans in the Second Temple, the Kohen Gadol was often the person who bribed the Roman consul enough to have them strong arm and install this individual as the Kohen Gadol. So you can imagine that there actually might be a period where the Kohanim were not as well up to speed as they needed to be in their knowledge and learning, etc. So what happens if the Kohen is not well versed enough in this, but there happens to be somebody at the local Jewish university, right, at Bar Ilan University, who is considered the world's foremost tzaratologist, the head of the tzaratology department at Bar Ilan University, right? Now this person is not a Kohen, but this person can diagnose tzarat from a mile away, right? So what do you do in this circumstance? So the Talmud says that the Kohen brings in the tzaratologist, right, as a resident scholar or an expert, right, on the subject, consults with the expert. The expert comes and stands alongside the Kohen, takes a look, and then here's where the Talmud gets fascinating. The Talmud says the expert then gives his determination over to the Kohen, and the Kohen declares tahor or tameh. What is interesting, fascinating about this is why is the Kohen needed there at all? The Kohen is only making his declaration based on the determination of the tzaratologist. So let the tzaratologist be the one to make the declaration.
I have a guess.
1 minute. So I just want to make sure everybody understands the question. The point. The determination about whether this is tzarat or not is by looking at the physical manifestation, looking at the facts, and just determining yes or no. So if that's the case, and it's the tzaratologist that's the one with all the knowledge, and the Kohen is basing it completely on the expertise of the tzaratologist, then why is the Kohen needed at all? And yet the Torah says unequivocally that the one who's going to make the declaration is the Kohen. And not only that, but the person only in fact becomes impure once the Kohen makes his declaration. So the question is, you can't have it both ways. Either it's entirely determined by the facts of the actual manifestation, or it's determined by the Kohen. If it's determined by the facts, then once the tzaratologist says definitively that the facts prove this is, that should be it. Then this person has it. So what exactly is the Kohen needed for? Jerry, go ahead.
I think it's because, if I remember correctly, this is a spiritual disease and a base, and the Kohen is the head spiritual guru. So the physical manifestation is important, but it's not determinative.
So you see that's what makes this issue fascinating, because the Torah does not. That's what we would assume, and that would be a very good answer, except that the Torah says that the Kohen, or whoever it is, and this is what the Talmud is saying, it's entirely about its physical manifestation.
Mhm.
It's entirely about it. That is the determinant. It is, in fact, the determinant. So then why go through the farce of having the Kohen be the one to declare, if at the end of the day, what's determining whether the person has it or not is entirely the physical manifestation, and whether the physical manifestation.
I'll take a crack at it. It's
All right.
similar to Jerry's reasoning. It's a guess. Because the facts notwithstanding, this is still a spiritual experience. It's still, it's a divine experience, divinely mandated experience. So therefore, if it's a divinely mandated experience, then you will respond as that mandate prescribes. And mandate is prescribed that the Kohen will make the determination. Now, I think the gist here is to keep it in the divine ballpark. Don't let it become purely a secular issue, but keep it in the divine, within the bounds of the divine. So that's my guess.
That's a very interesting thing. So to a certain degree, you're building off Jerry's point, which is yes, this
Well, Jerry was
is
building off my point.
right, but she just got there first. But
Yeah,
either
she
way,
did.
the point is that what you're kind of both saying is that at the end of the day, even if it is about a physical manifestation, the origins, the foundation of it, what this is in essence is a spiritual malady. And that's the nature of this thing. So even though we are measuring by physical manifestation, we can't get away from the true nature of this, which is that it is a spiritual malady. And more importantly, it's a spiritual consequence for a spiritual mistake, for a spiritual detour, as it were. Yes, but let's take it a step further. And this is where the Rebbe says something brilliant and actually very powerful. Why a Kohen specifically? What happens if the tzaratologist is not just some academic, but is the great spiritual leader of the time, is the Moshe Rabbeinu of his era? So is a spiritual guru. Still not. The Torah definitively doesn't say go to the righteous of the time, because the Torah does say oftentimes, gives us to go to the shoftim, right? Go to the spiritual leaders. The Kohanim were not necessarily they were in fact not the spiritual leaders. Aaron was not a spiritual leader. Moshe was a spiritual leader. So what exactly was Aaron? What were the Kohanim? Why the Kohen specifically? It's interesting.
They're sort of emotional.
A Kohen has a unique task vis-a-vis the people, the congregation. The Kohen is meant to be a spiritual inspiration. And as you said, kind of Jerry, it speaks a little bit more to the emotion. We in Shul nowadays, there are very few things that are actual responsibilities of the Kohen over the average Jew, right? Obviously, now we don't have a temple, so we don't have any of the offerings and all that. But there is one thing, correct, there is one thing that a Kohen does till this very day, and makes a bracha over it, that only the Kohanim could do. And as Paula said, that is the Birkat Kohanim, right?
Kohanim.
Or as she said in French, Duchanim.
You speak French, Paul?
Right.
Bien sûr.
Yiddish.
Me
Yiddish,
too.
right? What's funny about it is Duchaning is not even Yiddish. It's what Yiddish does to Hebrew. Duchan is a Hebrew word. In Yiddish, Duchaning is how us Ashkenazis proudly butcher Hebrew and turn
It's
it into
true.
and turn it into a cholent. But
So what is Duchan? What's Duchan?
Duchan literally means, what does Duchan mean? A post, like a kind of a place, right? An information booth, right? Is called the Duchan, or any type of booth where somebody is holding forth from there. So the way that the Talmud refers to the Kohanim going to do the Birkat Kohanim is that the Kohanim would go to their post.
Ah,
So it's called that they went Yamdu ala Duchan. They went to stand at their post. So we've turned that in Yiddish vernacular. We call it Duchaning, like bench. Right? So, anyways, that's the terminology. So the Kohanim give the blessing to the people. Why the Kohen? Why is the Kohen giving the blessing to the people? Why aren't the rabbis giving the blessing to the people? Why is it the Levites? Why the Kohen specifically? Because it's hinted in the bracha. It's hinted in the bracha. What is the bracha that the Kohen makes when he gives the blessing? No, that's okay. Bracha, there is the blessing that they give. That's the Yivarach Hashem Yishmecha. But before that, they recite a bracha, a blessing on that mitzvah to do it. They go out do a Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and they say the Kohanim, and it ends in a word, and you will all, many of you are, if you have experienced the Birkat Kohanim multiple times, will be familiar with this word. The last word of the bracha, which is actually the word that I'm trying to get. Hamavarech et Amo Yisrael
Shata.
be'ahava. Sometimes you hear the Kohanim all kind of chant the Hamavarech et Amo Yisrael be'ahava. Ay 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 ay. Yivarechecha. The Kohanim. Ay ay ay. In other words, the Kohanim, in their act of giving the bracha, their responsibility is to be the conduit, the manifestation of God's desire to bless the people. Hamevarech et Amo Yisrael. But importantly, and this is the key word, not just to do it, but to do it with love. Be'ahava. Who blesses his people Israel, his nation Israel, be'ahava, with love. And the Kohen's responsibility and position is to represent that love, that beneficence from God to his people. So much so, the Talmud says, interesting, listen to this, fascinating, that if a Kohen is going up to Duchan, to do the Birkat Kohanim, and that Kohen has a problem with somebody in that congregation, right? He has some sort of issue with that person, right? The guy owes him money, the guy cut him off in the parking lot on the way into shul, or whatever it is, if this Kohen has a beef with anybody in the congregation, the Talmud says that Kohen should recuse himself from doing Birkat Kohanim at that time. Because you will not give that person a wholehearted blessing with full love. And at that point, you are not being the proper manifestation of God's beneficence to that individual, which is dangerous for that individual, and it's dangerous for the Kohen. The Talmud says it is a sakana, it's a danger for you and for the person. Better you recuse yourself because you are creating a blockage in the conduit of blessing that you otherwise should have to be here. To not only give the blessing, but to give the blessing with love. So, and this is why in scripture, a Kohen is often referred to as Ish HaChesed. It is the Kohen's responsibility to be a manifestation of God's kindness and God's love.
So you know why nobody answered Bi'ahava? It's
Right.
because when that word is being said, there is so much noise from everybody turning around so that, God forbid, their friend should be facing the Kohanim. No. We're all having our backs to the Kohanim so that we shouldn't go God knows what.
Paul is trying to make an excuse for us. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. You see,
It's really loud, all that shuffling.
right?
Yeah.
So it is. Now, among other communities, I'm sure now Chabad is not unique, but we put everybody under the talus. And I will tell you, when you have 8 children, you're putting under the talus, and the baby is a little miffed by all of a sudden having the world closed in, and it's hot and sweaty. You hope for minimal noise level. If you get that's considered a win. That's a win if you manage to do it. Oh, by the way, if you ever want, ladies, if you ever want to take in an experience, go to 770 or the Kotel, but the Kotel doesn't allow the same vantage point. To be there in the women's balcony, look down on the shul and watch at the Get Birkat Kohen, and all of a sudden, the entire shul that's been kind of, mostly black hats, the sea of black with the black hats and black yarmulkes and black suits, it all of a sudden blossoms into one massive carpet of talesim. It's a pretty magnificent sight to take that
Well,
all.
because they're all Kohanim, they're not all.
No. The congregation.
they're
puts themselves under
participating.
the talus. Everybody in the congregation, even the yeshiva baruch that don't wear a talus, basically come and rent space under somebody else's talus. Okay, can I?
Very
Can I
nice.
get
Oh,
under
because
that?
you want to be near a Kohen. Oh,
No. This is how in these shuls you receive the bracha
God.
of the Kohanim. You're fully kind of enclosed within a talus, kind of wrapped in God's blessing.
What the Kohanim do, Jerry, you and I understand this because of our backgrounds. The Kohanim will have the talus over their head while they're doing the benching. But we've all got our backs turned because there's this superstition that you're going to get killed from
Right,
the
you're
rays
not
of the
supposed to
eyes.
look. Right.
Exactly.
But in most circles, in fact, I will tell you like this. I cajole you to not turn your back to the Kohen from now on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, do not turn your back to the Kohen.
I
So
stop.
those that are
Thank
wearing the talus, that takes care of not seeing the Kohen.
Thank you.
And those that are not wearing the talus, those in the ladies section, you turn your eyes down into the sitter, and you just stand there looking at your sitter, but you're facing the Kohen to receive the bracha. I don't know who started the idea of turning your back to the Kohen, but it is very counterintuitive in terms of this. You're receiving a blessing and you've turned your back to the one who is bestowing the blessing upon you.
It's like, to the idea, I guess, was it's too holy. Like, yeah, I don't know.
So you're not meant to look at the Kohen directly. That is absolutely true.
Right.
But you don't have to turn your back to not look. There's other ways of not looking.
Thank you.
So yes, I cajole you actually to not turn your back. But either way, coming back to the point, the Kohen is a personification of God's kindness and love. That right there is the reason that God says, the one I want you to seek out in this moment where your exile hangs in the balance. The only ones God says, I trust to mete out this consequence are the ones who are tasked with loving their fellow Jews no matter what. In other words, this is a very serious consequence. And I only want it determined by the ones who truly care.
Aren't we all supposed to love every Jew?
So why do you think this is told to us in the Torah? Because there's an element of Kohen within each and every one of us. And this is the Rebbe's point. Don't pass judgment on anybody, even if you are 100% sure of the fact, until you've run it through the Kohen within you. The Kohen within you is the only one who's allowed to determine. Because on top of knowing it for a fact, right? You hear people say all the time, what do you want? The facts are the facts, right? It comes Yiddishkeit and says, no, facts are the facts. And then on top of that, layer a level of true caring and kindness and empathy. Because the Kohen, more than the expert, is going to turn around and say, is there any possibility, any way we can give any type of benefit of the doubt, no matter how remote it is? The Tzaratologist is not going to have that impulse, but the Kohen will. And the Torah there says the one who gets the final word is the Kohen, even if they're not the expert.
Now, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. Let's get back to the malady itself. And my understanding has been that this really isn't about physical, it's about spiritual. So question, how do you get eligible to get this skin blemish? Is it reserved for the people who are just terribly depraved?
Nope.
Or,
Ah,
One specific sin moves this on. One specific sin.
bad tongue. Lashon hara.
To say something negative about somebody else when they are not there to defend themselves.
I see. So this is solely for Lashon Hara.
Correct.
Okay. Now, how do you fix that?
So
How do you fix it to get back in the community?
the exile and repentance. And when God determines that you have, in a sense, gone through a period of introspection, regret, and proper resolution for the future, the tzaraat starts to recede. That's the proof this is not a physical illness. This is brought about by a spiritual malady, and it becomes repaired when you repair that spiritual malady. But this specific illness, and the one who declares it, we see it's very fascinating, because why this specific one yields this such a severe consequence, and why again we have the Kohen involved in this? Because Lashon Hara is an easy sin.
That's
We do
true.
an easy sin, but an easy sin because of an issue, a far more nefarious problem, your lack of empathy for somebody else. The fact that this person in your eyes doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt being that even if I'm sure this person did it, what I am saying is absolutely true, right? What? It's the truth. The fact that you don't give this person that benefit of the doubt, say, you know what, it might be true, but this person still doesn't deserve that I should say this and spread this when they're not there to defend themselves. In other words, Lashon Hara is the exact opposite of the Kohen.
So what does it say? What does this say about the sin ranking of Lashon Hara?
That's my point. That it is.
Things that seem to be a lot worse than Lashon Hara.
But that's
why,
right.
Why are you going to get a blemish on your hand because you spoke about somebody, but you're committing adultery and nothing happens until
the problem is because this is, as I said, a very easy sin, a very small sin that is incredibly insidious and incredibly worse than
Harmful. Isn't there somewhere that says that you can be put to death for Lashon hara?
no,
Or
that
Halvanat panim or
no,
something?
that Lashon Hara kills. Lashon Hara kills three people: the person who speaks it, the person who hears it, and the person who it's about. to give a sense of the seriousness of Lashon Hara. So to your point, Stuart, other serious sins are serious in the act, in the presentation, the manifestation. Murder, theft, adultery. We would all turn around and say, I would never do these kind of things. How many of you have committed adultery today? How many of you have committed theft today? How many of you committed murder today? But how many of you maybe said a little Lashon Hara today? Maybe shared something on the phone about somebody else?
Considering the consequences, I wouldn't admit it.
That's the point. This
Can't
what
hide
is-
it.
For you, Stuart, you're safe today.
Can't hide it.
You see,
Well, you don't
that's
have to
exactly
admit
the
it.
point.
Your body will show it for you.
This is the point. This is why of all of these sins, the point of this one, I saw a great advertisement. That's because the proof that it's great is that it stuck with me. You see an attractive person, young person, in this graphic, covered in this tar and muck. It's disgusting. And it's an advertisement for, to break cigarette smoking. And it says, if it was happening on the inside, was visible on
happening
the
on the
outside,
outside. Yeah.
visible on the outside, you would never smoke. And that's the point. It's only a cigarette, it's harmless, right? But if there would be a way to manifest what was occurring on the inside, on the outside, then you wouldn't look at that cigarette as harmless. Tzara'at is that. Tzara'at was taking this incredibly insidious spiritual malady that on the surface seems like nothing serious at all, and making it very clear, very obvious. And as you said, Stuart, if I would know the consequence, I would never admit, right? And hopefully, if we would understand the consequence, it would hold us back from doing it. But more importantly, it's not even the simple act itself that's insidious. The fact that it's character assassination. There's the famous story of a certain fellow who spoke Lashon Hara and then saw how the person he's spoken about standing in the community had been affected, and he realized that it was a lot more serious than he thought. So he's
I
feeling
thought
bad.
that story was about the rabbi.
Again, it's probably more of a metaphor or allegory, but either way, the person comes to his rabbi and says, Rabbi, I want to engage in some sort of tikkun and some sort of rectification to clear my soul from this particular sin. What kind of tikkun? Which prayers should I say? Should I fast 2 or 3 times? What should I do to make up for this? So the rabbi said, oh, it's a 2-step process. Oh, really? Just 2 steps? Great. What's step number 1? Says step number 1, it says go to that hill that's outside the city and open up a feather pillow and scatter all the feathers to the wind. Okay, what's step 2? He says, first do step 1, then I'll tell you what step 2 is. Okay, so the fellow says, all right, only 2 steps, but I really feel bad about it, so I'm going to do these 2 steps like really well. So he goes, particularly windy part of the day, and he opens up the feather pillow, and he's taking handfuls, and he's some in this direction, some in that direction. He's going to do the scattering behidur, right? Mahadrin. He's going to do it to the highest standard of kosher. He's going to spread these feathers all over the place. Fine, he finishes that. Great. Comes back to the rabbi and says, step 1, done. Rabbi, I'm ready for step 2. And the rabbi says, oh, you ready? Step 2? Go gather all those feathers. Put them back in the pillow. The guy says, Rabbi, that's impossible. They scattered everywhere. I wouldn't even know where to start to find these feathers. And the rabbi looked at him and said, exactly. Exactly. That's the damage you did with your Lashon Hara. In a modern day expression, you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Or that toothpaste back in the tube.
Right. Probably a better one. Not a reference to. But having said that, it's even more than the action and the damage it can do. It's an indication of a malady that exists in your soul. That you are willing to destroy somebody else, their character, just to get a juicy bit of information out there. Just to say, for that moment of juiciness. And in the meantime, this person now has to deal with the fact that a reglayim ladavar, that this thing has feet now, and it will spread. And everybody who will look at it will not, or her, will not look at them in the same way again. That lack of sensitivity to somebody else, that lack of empathy, that's a big problem. It might now be manifest in a simple narishkeit. You said something simply, maybe it won't affect them, maybe it's nothing so major that, but the simple fact that you were able to do that, not because it got you any real gain, just the return on this investment. You did something to affect somebody's entire reputation. It takes forever to build, et cetera, et cetera. Just to get a juicy bit of information. What does that say about the way you value?
Or just to pass on a juicy bit of information.
Correct. Either way. But the point is, there is a bigger problem that you have to address. This is a poison in a society that needs to be together like brothers and sisters. You, in this moment, cannot be among the population. Right now, until you rectify this, you need to be out there. But having said that, God says, I care about you. I don't want to mete out the consequence as much as I want you to be fixed. And therefore, who do I tell you to go to? To the Kohen, to the person who personifies kindness. Because when that Kohen has to label you and has to be the one to declare upon you Tameh and send you to your exile, that is a Kohen who has now a vested interest in your rehabilitation and will do everything possible to help you come back home. How beautiful is Judaism? How special is the Torah? That the Torah says this is an unacceptable malady. This is an unacceptable, your lack of empathy to your fellow person is unacceptable. Number one. And number two, in our effort to deal with it, I am going to send you to the people that are tasked with their very essence of their life is to be their empathy and caring and love for their fellow Jew. So that even as you, in a sense, suffer the consequence of your negative character, I am putting you in the best position possible to be rehabilitated. Because while you may not care about too many other people other than yourself, I care about you. This Cohen is going to care about you. We don't write off anybody. Nobody gets written off. And we don't just say, you're out, done, shun you. We cancel you. No, we don't cancel you. We rehabilitate you as quickly, as comprehensively, as much as possible and as necessary. So to a certain degree, the beginning of the consequence is also the beginning of the rehabilitation. Because even before you are going to hear the declaration that you are Tameh, you have already been given the address of the person that will help you become Tahor. I push you to seek out the Kohen, so that this Kohen will then take you under his wing and teach you what empathy looks like, what love looks like. Not for somebody you know and for somebody who's earned your love, but from somebody who you don't know, somebody who's, if anything, has earned your disdain, right? The Kohen can turn around and say, I'm not working with you, you're a terrible person. That's real tzaraat. That real tzaraat means that you have a blemish on your soul. No, so I don't care about you, you're not my problem. I hang around in righteous company and good with good people. So you're going to learn in real time from this Kohen who does take the time to help you, who does take the time to care about you. When you'll be on the receiving end of that kind of unequivocal love, that will be the best guidance to learn how to give it back. That is the prescription of this parsha. All right? Right?
Rabbi, I once heard from another teacher that my speaking one unkind thing, unkind, could be true, but unkind, about another person could tip the balance and prevent the coming of Mashiach. And so before I utter a sentence, I should ask myself, is it worth it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Good
Yes.
thing to
I
remember.
try to do that. I
Well-
don't do it, but I try.
Kabbalah defines the four categories of creations: mineral, vegetable, human, animal, and human. Right? This is where, as we talk about often, Judaism differs from the world of science. Science sees only three categories: mineral, vegetable, and animal, and a human being is on the sophisticated end of the animal spectrum, right? We are evolved primates. Judaism says no, human being is a quantum leap different creation. It's not mineral, quantum leap to vegetable, vegetable to animal, animal to human. Human being is an entire class of being that was created deliberately as such. Now, the Kabbalah Talmud gives a title for each classification. The classification of minerals is called domain, the inert class, and which is a very apt definition, right? That is what defines everything in the mineral class, which is that it has no dynamism. It doesn't grow or move on its own, right? Then you have the vegetable class, which in Hebrew matches it's called the tzomeach, the growing class, right? The animal class in Judaism is known as chai, the living class. So you have the inert, the growing, the living, right? So then what do you call the human class?
Adama.
You would assume that the humans would be called the, I don't know, maybe the thinking class, right?
I was going to say maybe the spiritual level.
Right. So fascinatingly, the terminology that that Kabbalah so intuitively understanding that each thing about each class and giving it its name calls the class of human beings midaber,
Oh, the speaking.
But the
the
words,
communicating class.
the communicating,
Mm.
makes sense,
Now that's interesting because animals communicate too, so do even plants.
but not with words.
So what makes a human being unique is that by us, our communication is more than just an instinctual tool we have. It's an art by us. Our communication is the best thing about us. It expresses our empathy, expresses our ability to leave ourselves and totally go to somebody else. Right? It is are we the strongest beings, the fastest beings, the beings with the best eyesight in any of the five senses or any? What is it that makes a human being the masters of this world?
Speaking words.
Our ability to collaborate.
Mhm.
Our speech is our most powerful tool and therefore also our most powerful weapon,
Yeah.
because that's the way it works. And it speaks to, no pun intended, what is really going on inside of us. People that speak nicely, speak kindly, et cetera, is indicative of the way they are. People that have no problem saying nasty things, speaking nasty things. That's an indication of something that is a bigger, a deeper problem. I'll finish on this point. We are about to have the Seder, right? The Pesach Seder. In it, we introduce 4 children, right?
Mhm.
And we say, when we introduce what they say, what is the statement? We say, Chacham Mahu Omer, Rasha Mahu Omer, Tam Mahu Omer, She'enu Yodeh Lishon, right? That's an interesting turn of phrase. We don't say Chacham Omer, the Chacham says such and such and such, which would be the simplest way to say it. The Chacham says this, the Rasha says this. It doesn't say that. It says, Chacham Mahu Omer. The Chacham, what does he say? Okay, so that's maybe more of a dramatic way of presenting it. The Chacham, what does he say? Or it could also mean Chacham Mahu Omer. The Chacham, what he is how he speaks.
Wow.
Rasha
Oh.
Mahu Omer. Rasha,
Very interesting.
Mm.
and
But also actions. You haven't mentioned that either. I think you see people through their actions.
no doubt, without question.
Mhm.
But action is one layer more removed from the essence of your soul, which is why it not because it is, of course, but your speech is intuitively coming straight from inside of you and coming out. And it really is, your speech is the way you take something from inside and you bring it out. And it doesn't but being just words. It could be obviously somebody who is mute can talk with their hands. Really, communication is the
Mhm.
right. This is right. This is in Washington D.C. That's the name of the game, right? What's the word? Communication.
word.
I'm in communications, right? It's all about
Yep.
communicating, right? This is the buzzword. This parsha teaches us how important and powerful and potent your words are. And the lack of sensitivity of that is a spiritual malady that will be manifest in a physical way so that it can be addressed because it needs to be addressed. All right,
My
everybody?
stupid question,
Thank you.
what does it mean when you get salad on your wall?
You like the point over here. Jerry's team.
No, I always remember when you first moved into your house, there was like this white growth on your dining room wall, and I was teasing you guys that it was salad, God forbid.
Right.
Remember that? It was like mold or something.
Right.
I've
Right.
actually seen it.
Yeah.
I've actually experienced it. It's-
They're
It's
saying,
really something.
you
Go
can see
ahead.
that can, but around on the wall. But the reason I held off on that, Jerry, is because that's next week's parsha. Usually,
Okay.
so stay tuned. Oh, good.
Okay.
Stay
I'm
tuned.
going to leave you.
Okay, good.
I'm going to leave you on an impossible cliffhanger, so you tune in next week.
Can I just
Good.
point out,
Good.
in connection to Pesach, Miriam, I think was the first one to get it, right?
Well, not necessarily the first, but the first documented case of tzara.
First time that it's been told. Yeah, okay.
Yes, where Miriam was talking about Moshe and Zipporah behind their back.
It really was gossipy.
Yeah, yeah. And she got hit with Sarat. And that was it. And the Torah tells us.
That's when Moshe prayed for her. Ana elna refanala.
And Rafano.
Elna refanala.
Right. Correct.
Rid of being sick.
Yep. So,
Right.
Shortest,
Right.
shortest bracha is in the Torah.
and that is an indication that even the most righteous among us can be susceptible
Again, take that
to
over
this.
there.
Because again, we consider it's just words. No, there's no such thing as just words.
That's dirty now, so I checked it off.
And that's the point.
That's true.
I'll save
No.
my story about 25 years ago and the walls of the shul that had Savara and why that all
Next
happened.
week.
Next
For
week.
next week.
Next week.
Another
week.
container.
Thank you.
Usually, let me explain. Usually Tazria and Mitzorah, the two Torah
Are
portions
together.
discussed,
Right,
are together.
Ah,
right,
This year is a leap year, so they're not.
right.
This week's Torah portion talks about the first two versions of Tzarat on your skin and on your clothing. And next week's parasha discusses it what happens when it's on the wall of your house. And one of the reasons that it is a standalone discussion rather than being put together with the other ones is because Tzarat on your home can have an entirely different
you.
result. And that is, that's why I say we want to talk about that next week. Put it this way, Tzarat on your skin is oy vey. Tzarat on your clothing is oy vey. Tzarat on your home could be Yahoo. But we'll have to
Really?
hear about,
Wow.
yeah. You can hear about that next week.
Next week.
Next week.
Okay.
Can't
Good
wait.
enough.
I'm counting the minutes.
Rabbi.
All right.
Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Jerry,
you so
don't lose any
much.
sleep. Don't lose any sleep.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom, Ezra.